Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
Theron felled the third and final Thornhulk, his blade twisting and ripping, knocking its head off as the light of dawn beamed down from the skies, snaking through the gaps in the forest's leaves. The exoskeleton of the Thornhulk was especially tough. Its inner flesh, though, was not only delicious, but it was exceptionally soft. His blades had dulled considerably after these 3 battles, and yet they had always been able to pass through the joints and inner flesh of the beetles with ease. After a few slashes, he managed to take out a small bead from the center of the creature's head. It reflected a greenish bronze hue unique to bronze resonance with Mancy beasts. What was unique to the Thornhulk, though, was the swirling patterns within. They matched the beautiful mahogany and brown patterns of their exoskeleton. Honestly speaking, these exoskeletons were quite valuable, but Theron didn't have a spatial device that he could use openly, so he was unable to bring them all back. This 7th resonance exoskeleton, though he would, it should fetch a pretty penny. He hadn't gotten any rewards for killing Yanaway for obvious reasons, but this would definitely be worth more than that. It would be worth at least 50,000 bronzes, even if he didn't include the beast core. Looking at his blades, it was about time he bought new ones. Plus, after mastering 3 techniques to consummate, it was also about time he added more versatility to his arsenal. After all, if he was going to return to Daggers of the Night, he was going to need a little extra something in his back pocket. Theron dug out all the flesh in the exoskeleton, doing whatever he could to make it lighter. After he was finished, he grunted, heaving it all onto his back. His feet sank into the ground, his legs quivering. It seemed that his training wasn't over yet. With a step, he left in a light jog. Theron dropped the bag of 3 beast cores on the table. Byrne looked up, raising an eyebrow. It was quite early in the morning, so much so that there was no one in the classroom yet. He was only here because he had to take this job quite seriously despite what most of his actions seemed to relay. If they were going to turn the youth against the Imperial clan, then his role was actually quite important. What he didn't expect was Theron to suddenly appear here. There was an odd glow to Theron's face. He was calm and collected, and almost looked like he had just gotten a refreshing night of sleep. Once again, they had lost track of Theron last night. He had meant to keep tabs on him, but the kid seemed to have a knack for slipping away. It was one of the reasons he had been even more certain that Theron was from Daggers of the Night, but that theory had no choice but to be buried. Could it be? Byrne reached forward and tipped the bag over. His eyes narrowed when the cores began to roll out. 1 6th resonance beast core, 2 7th resonance beast cores. Feral beasts didn't have beast cores to begin with. All of their power was concentrated in their bodies. These could only be from Mancy beasts. Thornhulks. It didn't take more than an instant for Byrne to recognize the patterns. He had completed the mission in a single night, right after suffering what should have been such a harsh blow to his soul. Byrne's fingers trembled just the slightest bit. He looked up subconsciously, finding that the arrogant Theron from yesterday was gone, replaced with the same gentle, unassuming boy that usually sat in his classes. A facade he felt was exactly that, fake, and yet he couldn't see through it even though he knew it to be the case. What he didn't know was that the bravado Theron had shown in the dean's office was the real facade. Theron wasn't that person. He had never been. I didn't expect that you would pick such useful beast cores. I don't know what you mean, teacher, Theron replied calmly. I only chose what made sense to choose. Where are the exoskeletons? You never told me to gather them for you. Every reply was just as gentle. Byrne almost hated how soothing Theron's voice was. It made it difficult to hate him. But for some reason, that only annoyed him more. He didn't know why he became so agitated around this youth. He could only hope that his death date was sooner rather than later. You've done well, Byrne eventually said. He waved a hand, and a bottle appeared. It quickly shot into Theron's palm. Catching it, Theron looked down. He then nodded. Thank you. I actually had a different favor to ask of you, though, teacher. And that is? Byrne asked indifferently. I want to sit in on the 4th year botany class. Byrne's expression changed. This he didn't expect. While it seemed like all years were tossed in together, There were certain classes barred from under years, this being one of them. Herbology was considered quite a dangerous endeavor for obvious reasons. Without completing certain credit prerequisites, it was impossible to attend these specially curated classes. Is that so? All right, Burns said slowly, his gaze shifting to the pill bottle. Thinking about what was inside, he decided he might as well allow this. Theron turned and left after saying his thanks again. Burns' eyes narrowed. Theron actually didn't check what the pill was before leaving. That was unexpected. Theron looked in the bottle after returning to his dorm. He hardly reacted to the fact he had been awarded with a mere 3 mid-tier bronze resonance pills. He had been taking pills like this since he was in 3rd resonance. What were they supposed to do for him now that he was in the 7th? He tossed it to the side indifferently. Out from another secret compartment, he pulled out a new black robe, his last having been tossed in his escape. It was time to return to Daggers of the Night. Theron had chosen 2 new techniques. The first was water wrap, a control method that used tentacles of water to restrain opponents. At the entry boundary, it could only be used with force and speed because the tentacle itself would be too intangible to maintain steady contact. At the proficient boundary, the outer skin of the technique would be more substantial and could thus be used to restrain and limit the actions of others with greater ease. Beyond this, the true strength of the technique could begin to be displayed. Depending on the intent of the mansur, it could flow into a more focused control method or an extra attacking and defensive method. Much like most techniques, the end result would be dependent on the user upon reaching the consummate boundary, though most would never step beyond proficient. The second technique was water side. It was an additional attacking method, sharper, faster, and far more lethal than water bullet, not to mention having a wider range. At Adept, it could be as much as 3 meters across, making it quite the quasi-area of effect technique as well. Theron was a bit slower to improve with water wrap, as it was still stuck at proficient, but he had already brought water scythe to adept. The principles that built it were too similar to water bullet. The process of concentrating water, taking advantage of its density, and using speed to cut through things. It was the same thing on another level. Water scythe was actually a mid-tier technique, much like water wrap, while Theron's other 3 methods were all low-tier bronze resonance techniques. Theron, however, saw the world very differently. With his blades by his side, he would walk his own path. But first, he needed to get his father's blade back. It didn't matter how long it took or what he had to sacrifice. This life of his wasn't his own. Theron appeared in his Daggers of the Night living quarters. It looked exactly the same, but he knew this wasn't the location he was used to. The headquarters had most definitely been moved, even though the entrance method had been the exact same as always. Please proceed to the hall. Congratulations on surviving. A voice echoed from a dirty mirror to the side. Theron hardly reacted to it, simply nodding. His hood over his head, he strolled out and into the eerily familiar halls. One would have thought that their last headquarters had been transplanted here. Even the curves and markings on the wall were identical. If not for his sharp intuition, it was hard to fathom if Theron would have realized it at all. Soon, he had made it to the hall. 001 reporting, he said calmly. Of which year? The very same lazy old man behind the desk asked calmly, without even looking up. Them all. The old man paused, his eyes narrowing. He slowly looked up. I don't have time for games, child. Next time you report yourself, state your title properly. I've seen 3001s in the last week, and you were among the last to arrive. Don't think yourself to be special. After every recruiting cycle, code names would be given. These code names would come in the form of numbers assigned by ranking of performance. Obviously, 001 referred to Theron's placement as number 1 in a cycle. Normally, he went by River. His code name was 001997. It was obvious that for the sake of this culling, reporting this code name was more important than anything else. It was the way they would register who returned and who died. Merchant Greycoat's killer, Theron replied calmly. The old man opened his mouth as though he was about to lose his cool, but then he paused. He looked at the blue eyes shining through Theron's cloak, and his lips slowly closed. The young these days are truly arrogant, he finally said. shaking his head. He lowered his gaze back to whatever he was reading and then ignored Theron. Clearly this was his way of saying he had now registered him. Theron, however, didn't leave. "I've noticed something about you, old man," Theron said. "I'm busy. You're always here, and you don't react to much," Theron continued unbothered. "But I'm also pretty sure that you aren't in silver resonance. And if you were a normal goal man, sir, I would be able to sense it. So, why is it that I cannot? I do not have unlimited patience. I need the protection of someone like you," Theron continued, as though the old man's words were going in through one ear and out the other. "I'm just a desk jockey. You're also an assassin that shows your emotions a bit too easily, which is odd, because like I said, you don't usually react to much. When I first handed in the Merchant Greycoat mission, your reaction was also clear on your face. That either means one of two things. Either you have no right to be here, or you've grown to a level where you can truly blend into society, a mortal amongst mortals." The old man set his book down and looked up at Theron. For the first time, Theron felt a cold chill. "Would you like me to kill you right here and now, child? Do you not understand the words I am speaking? Buzz off." "No. What I would like to understand is why a talent like me was almost killed at the hands of a silvermancer who should be a senior to me. Is rule number 1 of the guild something you wipe your ass with?" Bang! Theron stood in place, but the sturdy desk almost shattered to pieces. Fine cracks raced across its surface, splintering into one another and fusing. Seeing Theron still standing there, the old man's aura vanished into thin air, and he slowly stood. "All right," he said lightly. He tapped the desk, and an alarm was raised. Disputes amongst assassins were rare. Normally, as their profession called for, such things would be handled in the dark. Someone like Theron almost never appeared. But since he had proclaimed such things so boldly, out in the open, and with so many witnesses, well, there was no choice but to trigger a dagger's call. A dagger's call. The last time one had happened was 7 years ago. It could be said that it was a hidden rule of the guild that was almost never triggered. It existed purely for deterrence. But on rare occasion like today, someone would be stupid enough to use it. The reason it was so foolish was because, amongst assassins, the only reason someone would take this sort of path was if they had no confidence against their enemy. On the surface, this would even the playing field. In action, the result would be much the same as always. Death. Theron's arrogant demeanor vanished after he turned away from the old man. A deathly stillness hung in his chilling blue eyes. Today, it was unlikely that he'd be able to get his father's short sword back. But he would be establishing himself and taking his pound of flesh. Raiden had done well to make him feel his presence. Today he would learn just who River was. The ambience was dark. It always was in the guild, but there was something particularly heavy about this place. As assassins filed into the seats, each donning their own black cloaks, the air only seemed to get darker, heavier. Theron stood on a circular platform filled with deep grooves, all on his own. There was a small, elevating step that stood apart from the rest of the ancient etchings, and his feet barely had the space to stand calmly on it. His hands hung in his sleeves loosely, his eyes closed. He had already been standing here for 30 minutes, and assassins were still arriving. According to the rules, the target had 3 days to respond to the call, but everyone knew that returnees were nearby given the current circumstances. The guild had yet to start handing out missions once more, so there was no excuse for anyone to take more than a few dozen minutes at most. As such, most began to file in after a half hour. But then an hour passed, and then 2. Some of the more powerful assassins shook their heads, standing up and leaving. If Raiden wanted to prove a point, they certainly wouldn't obediently wag their tails waiting for him. They had things to do. The flow of assassins began to reverse as the day waned. Down on a platform before the circular stage, the old man leaned back, reading his book. He didn't seem to care about the proceedings, but given the fact there were no gold assassins present, it was too obvious that he held all the authority here. From time to time, he would glance at Theron, but the child just stood there, unbothered. In fact, it didn't seem like even a single hair had shifted on his body. At first, he didn't think much of it, but then a quarter of a day passed by, and then half a day. Theron's breathing was still even, his feet still in the same location, his body still unmoving. He began to almost vanish from the old man's senses, forcing him to narrow his eyes. Theron's presence sharpened his mind's eye again, but the fact it had faded even the slightest bit in the first place made his heart skip a beat. What he didn't know was that if it had been raining, let alone 12 hours, Theron would have vanished from his sights instantly. And then an entire day passed. The arena was mostly empty by now. The only ones that remained were the weakest of the bronze assassins, probably strong-armed into staying behind by their elders to report on what happened and call them over. And beta. And then there was a movement. A flash of lightning arched through the air. It was a random time in the afternoon on the second day. Raiden didn't pick a particular time at all, just appearing when he felt like it, his body moving into a bolt that landed perfectly on the opposing elevated platform. The circular, ancient rune-etched stage trembled. Theron's eyes slowly opened, but he looked right by Raiden, his eyes landing on an assassin that rushed in after him. Looking around, this assassin found a seat near the first row and then sat. The arena burst with life. One after another, message jade started to go out, and a sea of assassins was soon swarming back in. The old man also seemed to start paying attention to things, closing his book slowly. He swept a glance over the both of them, his eyes lingering on Theron for just the slightest tick more. A dagger's call has been thrown. I assume that neither of you two need this explained. Challenger, explain your plight. The introduction was lazy, but the old man couldn't be bothered to say more. An attempted violation of Rule 1 of the Guild. And how do you plead, defendant? Not guilty, Raiden replied indifferently. How would you like to proceed, Challenger? Theron didn't reply. Instead, he moved for the first time in almost 2 days, his blade drawing a line across his robes and forearm. The movement was so fluid and swift it was hard to tell when he had unsheathed his dagger in the first place. He sliced skin and fabric in one motion, blood splattering onto the etchings below, or rather one very particular bowl within the etchings. The old man's eyes narrowed. The challenger has chosen true blood. Raiden watched this scene for a moment before rolling up his sleeve. He unsheathed a small curved dagger, his movements slow as though deliberately doing so with the intention of allowing others to follow him. He too drew a line across his forearm. In truth, he didn't expect this. True blood was a temporary soul-binding method. It only served one purpose: to force those under its effects to tell the truth. The problem with this path was that not only did he have no obligation to answer questions he didn't want to, but Theron was subject to the effects as well. In this sort of situation, didn't Theron have far more to hide than he did? After all, he knew River's true name now, while Theron knew nothing at all about him. Theron squeezed his fist, allowing his blood to pool until it had perfectly filled the bowl to the brim. Then he released his hold, taking out a bottle of medicine, pulling out a fingerful, and drawing a line across it. He pushed the tip of his finger into the wound, the clay-like medicine both stemming the bleeding and healing at once. Raiden's approach was very different. Lightning sparked, and he directly used it to burn his wound closed. Like I said, you two know the rules. Questions must be related to the accusation. Failure to do so will result in immediate death. No one is obligated to ask a question, but failure to do so will increase the pressure on your pain receptors. Relief comes from answering. The same question cannot be asked twice. The defender has the right to rebut and counter-defend. The final judgment will be decided by me according to the result. Challenger, you may ask the first question. The old man hadn't even stepped off of the platform when Theron spoke. Did you try to kill me? The old man almost fell off. He almost snapped his head in Theron's direction. Almost. This child couldn't possibly be so foolish, right? Laughter immediately erupted through the arena. One wouldn't think that this was a den of assassins at all. It was more like a group of people from teen to middle ages enjoying a comedy show. Among them, Manson's reaction was the fiercest, directly falling out of his chair and holding onto his stomach. Theron didn't react to their laughter in the slightest, his gaze chilling as he met Raiden's. A pair of blue eyes stared back at him, and Raiden seemed to hardly react either. There was no need for him to do so when others had said all that needed to be said for him. Did you kill my brother? Raiden replied with a question. There were 3 ways to reply in a true blood dispute. The first was to answer directly under the effect of the soul contract. The second was to not answer at all. And the third was to reply with a question. This question had to be related to the one being posed, and it had to have a path that could lead to your innocence. Obviously, if Theron had killed Lin, then Raiden would not only be vindicated, but he would be right to kill Theron on the spot for violating the first rule. No one expected Theron's reply, though. Did you send your brother to be killed? Raiden's eyes narrowed. Clearly, he didn't expect this reply either. The old man's gaze shifted to the runes, and his shock toward Theron's line of initial questioning slowly faded. It seemed that maybe this child might know what he was doing after all. There was no way that Theron should know of this. That meant that he had deduced it. As for why that was, it was none other than thanks to the figure that rushed in after Raiden. Manson. Manson was the very same assassin who had stopped Theron after he handed in the merchant Greycoat mission back then. The first thing he had asked Theron back then was where Lin was. At first, Theron didn't think much of it. Manson and Lin must have been friends, and it was unlikely that Lin would hide the fact that he was going on this mission if his goal was to brag about his achievements. But Theron spotted Manson during his escape from the culling, only for Raiden to successfully find him and almost kill him. That much was still nothing more than a coincidence, and there was certainly no proof. It made it even harder to believe because Theron had recognized him by his gait alone before and went out of his way to avoid him. So even if Manson had spotted him back then, how could he let Raiden know where he was? But something kept nagging at him, confirmed especially after Manson just rushed in after Raiden. Why would a silvermancy genius amongst geniuses care to spend so much time with a bronze assassin? After listening to Raiden's conversation with Sadie, Theron understood the genius personality quite well. Cutthroat, cold, detached, willing to do whatever he needed to claim power, but he was also no cowardly rat, and he certainly wasn't someone who needed groupies. That pointed to one conclusion. It was eating Raiden up inside that he hadn't been the one to clear the merchant Greycoat mission, and he also really wanted to know why he hadn't been allowed to. His brother was his method of doing so, and Theron had stood in the way of that. As for Manson, he had been a close friend of Lin's who somehow ended up being closer to Raiden than even the latter's own brother had been, meaning he had some sort of special ability, talent, or usefulness. The moment Manson walked in, Theron knew that Raiden would obediently take one step after another in the palm of his hands. At first, the laughter was still glaring, but the longer Raiden remained silent, the more it ebbed. Soon, there was a deathly silence that hung in the air. The pool of blood in Raiden's bowl suddenly shrunk, and ghastly green veins appeared across his body. He didn't speak a word, and his expression didn't so much as change, but all those present knew that he was enduring a shocking amount of pain right now. Interesting non-answer. Theron said calmly, sending your brother to die for a mission you're so very curious about, and then throwing a fit when someone else cleared what you couldn't. Challenger. The old man interjected. Theron didn't look at the old man for the reprimand. Raiden was seething, but there was nothing he could do. He couldn't even bring up Sadie because it was unrelated to the question Theron had only just asked. The formation would sense that and kill him. Arbitrator, I would like you to cast your judgment now. I am finished with my questioning. The old man paused and then exhaled a breath. If the child had just come here to vent a bit, then that was fine. He had made a great enemy, but judging by their questions, it had long since reached that point already. What do you request? The old man asked. It was a right the challenger received once the defendant failed to answer a question. After all, they couldn't allow everyone to just flout the rules, right? Although not all requests would be followed, within certain limits, they could be accommodated. 3 months of confinement and death by combat with his right-hand man. Theron replied. Raiden's eyes narrowed. His right-hand man? Who was? Fury flashed through his blue gaze, lightning sparking. And that would be Manson 003 of 993. 003, 993, the old man barked. Present yourself. Manson didn't expect to be called out in this way. A bit shell-shocked, he made his way forward. But by the time he got to the stage, he was calm. What was Theron? A 5th Resonance Bronze Mancer? He had long since reached the 9th. There was no competition. However, maybe you should have noticed that Raiden didn't even look at him a single time. I don't know why you would come seek your own death like this, Manson sneered. Begin. The old man's voice fell. Manson shot forward, dark mana streaming out of his body as he suddenly vanished from Theron's sight. However, Theron was an eerie sort of calm that reminded one a trickle of rain. Here, he said softly, have his back. A spark of lightning shuddered within Theron's body, pain flaring up within him. But one wouldn't guess that from the way he pointed his finger forward. A water bullet shot through the air, encased within it the last strand of lightning Raiden had left in Theron's body in hopes of crippling him. That night, Raiden had just not been able to leave things alone. How could he leave a threat so easily? So he compromised in this way, doing something he managed to hide even from Sadie's eyes. The largest reason Theron had suffered so much was because of this strand of lightning. And right this moment, it appeared again, ejecting itself from Theron. There was a shudder through the air as Theron's black cloak billowed. In a single bound, he stepped into 8th Resonance. Bang! The water bullet collided with what looked like empty air. Manson froze, convulsing once, then twice, then thrice, before exploding into a rain of blood. Lightning that very clearly carried Raiden's aura writhed on the ground. Theron, however, had already turned to leave without another word. No one noticing how a water-wrapped tentacle took something away from Manson's body. When will missions start again? Theron found himself standing in front of the old man minutes later, as though nothing at all had happened. He could feel the old man's gaze on him, but he scanned through the missions before him as though he couldn't tell. There was a grace period due to the culling, but very soon Theron would be running up against his quota. He needed to complete another mission soon, since he couldn't count on Yanaway. Though Theron was expecting an answer, he didn't get one. Instead, the list he was looking at found a blockage before it. His mind came out from a jade to find that a palm was over his own. You say you want protection? The old man asked. Theron's gaze flashed. This was not part of his plan. He was simply speaking nonsense to push the old man into a corner and force him to follow the guild's rules. This turnaround wasn't expected. His mind kicked into overdrive, shifting things around. The main goal today was obvious. In confinement, Raiden wouldn't be able to improve. If Raiden couldn't cultivate, within 3 months Theron was confident in reaching Silvermancy, killing the Lightning Mancer himself in the cover of darkness, and taking his father's sword back. Unfortunately, he had known that asking for his short sword back wasn't in the purview of the requests he could make. In addition, he didn't want to do anything to compromise his chances of getting it back. Right now, the short sword was probably forgotten in a corner of Raiden's spatial device. If Theron made it clear how much he wanted it back, and yet failed to retrieve it, there would be no time for regret if Raiden decided to destroy it to infuriate him further. For now, this slow and steady approach was best. Maybe Raiden had already forgotten about the blade, and that would be for the best. Theron's lips parted to respond, but he found something projected into his mind before he could. 3-star bronze mission, kill Thaurix Ironheart. Reward, 335,000 bronzes. Silver Resonance Breakthrough Pill. Details. The Ironheart clan is a earldom clan of metal mancers, known for their exceptional defenses and unordinary ability to manipulate the earth beneath their feet, changing its form into their unique Ironheart metal. There are signs that Thaurix has awakened the Ironheart bloodline to the silver tier already despite only being at the 9th bronze resonance. The bronze tier allows Ironheart skin to be formed. The silver tier not only provides an upgrade to this, but also allows imbued resonance to be reached. Thaurix is well known for his arrogance and could be easily goaded into one-on-one combat. This was all the information there was, but Theron was surprised that there was information at all. Normally, you could only see this information if the mission had been accepted. That was an ironclad rule. Nues. Just how high was this old man's clearance exactly? Clear this mission, and you will get what you want. All right, Theron said calmly. He already had some speculation. It seemed that this Ironheart would be attending the banquet. He didn't believe that it was a coincidence that this mission would appear at the same time as Sigil was holding such an event. The two connected in his mind seamlessly. You're accepting a bit too fast, don't you think? The only reason this isn't a 4-star mission is because it was put in yesterday. It doesn't make a difference, Theron said. The old man chuckled and removed his palm from Theron's hand. Off you go, then. Theron nodded and left. At the same time, his gaze flickered down to his hand, and the old man behind him looked at his own palm at the same instant. Peculiar, from first resonance to 8th in not even half a year, but I can't sense anything special about him. An odd variant. It seems this should be an opportunity. What the old man was most enamored with was Theron's dealing with Raiden's lightning. That mana control was simply out of this world. Just how long had he been storing that in his body? How much pain had he endured? He truly didn't plan on getting involved with this child at all. But there was a flash in the old man's eyes, and his demeanor seemed to change to that of a completely different person for a moment. Theron had made it too difficult to refuse. Between Raiden and Theron, just who would come out on top? Exactly. In a deep, dark, and damp room, Raiden sat in silence. Shrouded by black, his blue eyes seemed dim. You've suffered a loss today. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, stating something quite plainly. I have, Raiden said calmly. What have you learned? Nothing. Oh, I knew that this was a risk when I let him live. I did not want to do so, but I chose another path. Since this is my fate, so be it. When the opportunity next presents itself, he will die. In the meantime, I will take advantage of the positives of my decision if I must suffer the negatives as well. The voice didn't reply for a long while, but then seemed to nod. A wind kicked up, and there was suddenly an array of pills, bottles, and a single booklet before Raiden. Raiden's eyes narrowed, but he didn't bother to speak. He knew that his master was already gone. It seems that master has begun to take him seriously as well. Theron walked out of the hotel room, allowing a prostitute to scurry away. If he was going to return to such a hotel so often, he would obviously need a cover, even if he changed his face. His mind, though, was elsewhere. Imbued resonance. It was a term that he had only heard of vaguely, so rare he could only recall it being mentioned in 2 books he had read. But to this day, he wasn't sure what it was. And what did it mean for Thaurix's bloodline to allow him to touch it? It seems that the thistles would have to show their use again. The 4th-year botany class wasn't being taught by Byrne, but it was unsurprisingly being taught by a thistle. Maybe this was only natural. Of the noble families, the thistles had the closest relationship with herbs and nature. Of course, it was a family of soul mancers, the Johnny Dukedom clan, that truly monopolized herbology, alchemy, and things of the like. But the thistles weren't all too far behind. Unlike the other thistles in this branch of Imperial Academy, though teacher Vibra Thistle had been here from the start. She was an old woman that looked like she had a closer foot to the grave than even Byrne, but she had a sharp shrillness to her voice that made her sound decades younger. The class took place in a field rather than in the normal classroom setting. All around them, there was greenery and shrubbery. However, if one took even the most ordinary of leaves too casually, one would suffer. The best outcome might be itching a layer or 2 of skin off. The worst might be an immediate death. There was a reason this class was buried beneath so many prerequisites. Of all the mature-looking faces around, Theron stood out like a sore thumb as a result. One could join the academy any time before their 17th birthday, so long as one could pass the entrance exam. This meant that there were some 4th years here that were already into their 20s. A 14-year-old like Theron would certainly look out of place. However, Theron was too focused on the words of Vibra to care. He had tuned out the rest of the world, and it seemed that for once he was rewarded for his diligence. Unlike the other thistles, Vibra seemed to take a liking to him almost immediately. There was a hint of discontent at the start, but between his questions and his attentiveness, her heart melted. This was already the 2nd day Theron had attended this 4th-year botany class, and she already couldn't look at him without smiling. All right, that will be enough for today. Your task for today is to make it out of this maze of greenery. We are nearing the halfway point of the year, so this challenge will be substantially greater than what you are used to. Vibra smiled and looked toward Theron. Little Theron, would you like to start at the middle of the maze? You've only been with us for 2 days. I can give you a handicap. Theron shook his head. I would like to try if it isn't too much of a burden for teacher. A light chuckle came from Vibra. You do that, then. Good luck, everyone. She turned to the rest, her voice becoming shrill once more. Sharpen up and don't let a child beat you. Roots rose up from the ground and wrapped Vibra up. They pulled her down into the ground, and she vanished without a trace. Inwardly, Theron's eyes narrowed. A thistle that specialized in herbology is certainly a completely different sort of challenge. It seemed like a good thing that those like Vibra who took this path were rare amongst the thistles. But now wasn't the time to focus on this. Theron turned, and much of the class had already dashed out. He, however, wasn't in a rush. He wanted to make it out safely, and, as Vibra had said, this was only his second class. Until now, he had yet to fully integrate his former knowledge with real hands-on experience. What better chance than now? After scanning the region, he stepped forward. He had only taken 3 steps before he paused. After 2 or so seconds, he sidestepped and then continued. Though Vibra called this a maze, it wasn't exactly that. There weren't tall hedges. From a bird's-eye view, it would look like a normal field allowed to grow wildly. In fact, Theron could see a straight line right toward their destination, the small figure of Teacher Vibra already there. Deciphering what plants you were dealing with, how they might interact with those around them, and acting accordingly, that was the true maze. The furthest ahead was, of course, the 2 best-performing students of the class. They were about a dozen or so meters ahead of the second-place students, Nara and Valen. Nara was a vermouth, a member of their earldom. Valen, however, was much like Theron, not of noble blood, but a great talent in alchemy nonetheless. Be Epsilon. Nara was already 20 years old this year. Valen, however, was just 17 years old. The dynamic between the two was extremely competitive, and their deductions were quick. As they got closer to the end, they would only get quicker. Right now, they were still probing the difficulty. Theron sidestepped again, but just as he was about to allow his foot to fall to the ground, he paused. He raised a finger and dropped a tear of water. A vine suddenly shot up, snapping at the air right beneath his feet. When it hit nothing, it gave up quickly and vanished. The ground didn't even look disturbed. So many sensory carnivores around here. There's something about this maze that breeds them. How interesting. Carnivorous plants were very territorial, but this was already the second time Theron had avoided one. He pulled his foot back and stood in place, his eyes calmly sweeping things. So that's it. This maze wasn't set up at all. It was allowed to grow wildly on purpose. That way the challenge of making it out would be different every time. If the students could prepare in advance, what would be the point? Because of that, unique mutations were bound to appear from time to time. And this one, if Theron was correct, was particularly fascinating. Unfortunately, he didn't have the understanding to grasp it entirely. He only had an inkling. There must be a strong mana hanging around if so many have formed. But with how vibrant this field is, that doesn't feel like it makes sense. In which case, Theron raised a finger again. Water mana and wind mana, according to the complexities of mana theory, were both considered ene-aligned elements. Fire and earth were the opposite. Something like wood, being a fusion of earth and water mana, could take on the characteristics of both. Many old men and women spent countless years of their lives studying these sorts of things, so even Theron wouldn't claim that he completely understood. Also, these sorts of affinities didn't start making real sense until one reached much higher levels of cultivation. The main point was that plants could take on a path based on their circumstances. If above ground everything looked so bright and inviting, then the concentration of Een must be below ground. In which case, Theron closed his eyes and his water mana shifted. In the far-off distance, Vibra was paying attention to Theron from time to time, but the bulk of her focus was on Nara and Valen. They were also her star students, of course. Plus, though she spoke like she would leave them all to die if they made a mistake, she would certainly step in if something went wrong. So she was on high alert. But when she saw what Theron was doing, Her heart almost shut down. How is that possible? Theron didn't move for a full half hour. By this point, he was not only the furthest behind, but Nara and Valen were already near the exit, moving faster and faster in a rush to be first. Though, this pace was just relative. Their actual movement speed was still slower than a leisurely walk. Even the weakest of the class was already at the 75% point. From time to time, some would look back at Theron and shake their heads. They couldn't even understand how a first year was allowed to be here, much less participate in such an assessment. However, after so long, they just stopped looking at all. They had their own improvement to focus on. But then Theron opened his eyes and began to move. His nose twitched every few seconds, his eyes rapidly scanning as spheres of water rotated around him. These spheres subtly rippled and informed his movement. As he grew comfortable, he moved faster and faster, but unlike Nara and Valen, this wasn't a difference of a slow crawl and a slow walk. Theron had started off at a confident stride, and then seemed to enter a power walk, only to begin to jog. It looked like he could have gone even faster if he wanted, but it was entirely unnecessary. His feet seemed to barely graze the grass at some point. The current last place, a chubby young man who went by Torvek, looked back out of boredom, feeling like he needed a break. But when he saw Theron coming, his eyes widened. "Hey, it's dangerous. What are you doing?" Torvek's outcry caught the attention of many others, and the third person in the class who needed to be saved appeared. Vibra vanished in a flash, caught them, and soon a pale-faced youth was placed by her side. More and more gazes flickered to Theron, with even Nara and Valen being no exception. But then a few seconds passed, and then half a minute, and then a full minute. Theron showed no signs of being attacked. Theron himself ignored the words and glances. He was focused on his nose and sight, the spheres of water around him being almost an afterthought. He hadn't forgotten the real reason he came to this class. This boost to his water mana control was just a bonus. He didn't think it would have such an interesting application. Maybe he should thank Raiden for that. He also didn't know just how Floor Vibra was. Of course, as a Gold Mancer, she recognized what Theron was doing. But that was something that even Gold Water Mancer struggled to do even with a lifetime of experience. Nara and Valen suddenly realized that they might be overtaken if they were too casual and started pressing. They couldn't lose. They definitely couldn't lose. It was useless. Theron glided by them not even 5 minutes later, landing before Teacher Vibra and giving her a light bow. "Thank you for your teachings, teacher." Vibra blinked. "Do you understand what you've done?" Theron looked up at her in confusion. Seeing this gaze, Vibra's lip twitched, and then she calmed down. "Explain it to me. What did you just do? In your own words." "I noticed that the field had a strong Een character, and that was where most of the danger came from. So I found a method to detect it with my water mana and avoid the threats when they appeared." It was indeed as Vibra thought, but the 3 students who had failed by her side could only look in confusion. "Een? Since when did this field, so bright and cheerful, have Een character?" "Yes, but how?" "Water mana has a strong polarity to it, if you know how to trigger it. I found out recently that by controlling this polarity, I can force it to have various effects," Theron said simply. "Having it react to strong Een forces seems to be one of them. Directing and trapping lightning mana was another." But there was no need for him to say that out loud. "Fascinating, truly fascinating, you little Theron." Vibra shook her head, almost forgetting she had other students for a moment. In the end, she chose to bite back the words she wanted to say. "Well done. You may go and enjoy the rest of your day." "Thank you, teacher." Theron bowed once more and left. Vibra looked at his back, shaking her head slowly. What sort of monster was this? How could a person have such control without imbued resonance from bloodline? It didn't make sense. Theron returned to his dorm with a calm expression. He was close. Today, he had recognized many of the scents within the verdant bloomstone. He was about 90% of the way done, but there seemed to be some particularly unique scents remaining. His intuition was telling him that it was unlikely he would find them within the 4th-year botany class. "I'll have to find another method." Theron walked through the halls of Daggers of the Night. Soon, he had made it to a familiar desk and placed a brown linen sack down. The old man looked up, raising an eyebrow. "What's this?" "Just a warm-up." "Mm." The old man nodded and gave Theron his reward. He watched quietly as Theron left, an eyebrow raised in his heart. The old man is sharp. Maybe too sharp. Theron exhaled a breath, but this was a risk he had to take. While he was surprised by the old man's skepticism, it wasn't entirely unexpected. The day was Friday, the last day of the weekday. Tonight would be the banquet. It was odd for Theron to go out and complete another mission. But Theron also knew that the old man would never guess why he would do this. To the old man, he was probably unconfident in success. However, Theron just needed a reason to return to the guild. He rounded a corner and made a subtle movement with his palms and fingers. If one looked into the depths of his eyes, it would be possible to see just how dim and lifeless they were. Vainsong, a beam of red, entered his sleeve, and he seamlessly slipped back into his accommodations. Interesting. Theron had been waiting all week for this. After he killed Manson, he had sensed something odd on his body, but he also didn't want to take it outright and in the open. So he instead used his own blood to activate, water wrap, and bury it. Epsilon S. They were an assassin's guild. The platform used for the dagger call wasn't cleaned. It was allowed to dry naturally. In fact, all the blood from every dagger call triggered was still etched into the platform. It was part of the reason for its rusted, gritty look. As such, Theron knew that he would be able to bury the item in his bowl of blood. Because Raiden's lightning had been such a draw, not to mention the fact it was incredibly easy to hide movement of well-controlled bronze resonance water mana in the presence of wild silver resonance lightning mana. Theron's attempt had gone seamlessly. All he had to do was wait for the arena that was almost always ignored to be forgotten again. Finally, after nearly a week, he had gotten his chance. He actually picked this day on purpose because he knew that in the case the old man was suspicious, it would be for the wrong reasons. Would it have been better for him to just wait and turn in the Ironheart's head instead? Yes, but Theron knew that he was on a tight timeline, and killing the Ironheart wasn't exactly going to be easy either. It could be said that his margin for error was incredibly small. Luckily, there would be rain tonight. A bead rolled across Theron's palm. He didn't expect that he would get so lucky. It seemed that the Nightingale clan wasn't so simple to use. At the very least, that was what he hoped. Because if this was the plan of that little girl alone, he just might need to reevaluate her once again. So Manson wasn't just a henchman of Raiden after all. He was a mole the whole time. The bead in Theron's palm was formed from Soul Tie Jade. It had one use, and that was to relay all sensory information captured by the soul of the child holder to the Soul Tie Jade of the parent holder. One would think that meant that Theron would be exposed now, but that wasn't the case. As the name Soul Tie suggested, it was powered by the soul, meaning the moment Manson died, it shut down and was no longer functioning. It also wouldn't trigger again. One needed the parent Soul Tie Jade here in order to form a new tie. That meant the bead in his palm, right now, couldn't read or send any information. Still, this information seemed worthless. Manson was dead now, so he couldn't continue being a mole. In fact, it was possible that Theron should feel bad for killing someone who was likely just playing character. But not only did he not even feel the slightest twinge in his heart, this bead also wasn't useless. The Soul Tie Jade didn't have an infinite range. It was more than likely that Manson had to return to a specific location to allow it to relay properly. Since the parent Jade also had to be in range, whoever held it also had to make time to approach. It was still quite convenient because even if they were at opposite ends of a city, it would work well. So you never had to risk meeting face to face and blowing your cover. But it had its limitations. Considering all the chaos in the past few weeks, the odds that Manson had had a chance to dump the information on this Soul Tie Jade were low. Of course, it wasn't impossible that it had been emptied recently. There had been quite a lot of time since the culling. But that would depend on Theron's luck. There was only one question left to answer, then. How could he access it? That was actually quite easy. Any child Jade holder should destroy it before they were killed by detonating their souls. Unfortunately for Manson, he had not only been caught off guard, but Raiden's lightning had frozen him in mind and spirit. Without a soul overseeing it, A child soul tie jade was incredibly vulnerable. All you needed was the prerequisite mana control. Theron left his underground space and returned with a bowl of water, allowing the transparent white marble, fluttering with clouds within, to sink. He took a breath, exhaled, and then put his fingers into it. Slowly, one image and one memory after another began to pool into him. Only 2 weeks of information. It seems he has dumped it recently. It was unlucky, but still manageable. Half a month was a lot. This was also a crucial time, so there were still good odds that there was something important. Theron was patient, rushing through one sensory memory after another. Even if it took all night, he wouldn't care in the slightest. Luckily, he was running through the memories much faster than they had been lived. And then he suddenly stopped. A sharp glow radiated in his eyes. That right there. That was it. His odds of successfully completing Plan A had just gone from 60% to over 70%. This is your stage, little brother. I'm sure there will be some nonsense for you to deal with today, but you're one of mine. I won't let you be bullied. And if you feel the need to go wild, go wild. Sigil patted Theron's shoulder with a wide grin. It looked like he was more excited to see Theron go wild than anything else. Theron got the feeling that Sigil didn't really want to hold this banquet, but had been strong-armed into it. So the only way for him to make it up to himself was to get Theron to do something to make it worth his while. To this, Theron could only chuckle. I'll be trying my best to keep a low profile. Low profile. Sigil erupted with laughter. They've all definitely heard about your credit spree by now. Those also weren't the actions of someone who wanted to keep a low profile. Theron smiled. I'm sure you understand what I did there. Sigil paused. Right then, the two were in a small green room of sorts. There were plush couches around and luxury abound, not to mention the patented wooden accents the Thistles loved so much. For now, there was no one but the two of them here and a silent old man near the door. Though, judging by the reactions of this old man, it was like he couldn't hear a single thing, though Theron knew that even if he tried to have a hidden conversation with Sigil, it would be a fool's dream. You're quite straightforward, aren't you? Theron shrugged, leaning back in his plush chair. You've already said it. I'm no noble. And as a noble yourself, I'm sure you know exactly how nobles came into power. There was a flash in the old man's eyes as he looked toward Theron. That's quite the dangerous thing to say. Little brother, Sigil said, his smile remaining light. Not really. A soul imprint has already been placed on me. Sigil frowned. What? Theron raised an internal eyebrow, while the old man slowly looked away as though he hadn't heard a thing. It wasn't within Theron's expectations that Sigil wouldn't know of this, so he decided to adjust some things in his mind. This was actually an interesting development in his estimation. And no, I'm one of your clan's vassals now. I don't think speaking of such things around you is very dangerous at all. Sigil's frown only deepened. I'm not a fan of this, but my words don't carry much weight right now. Fair enough. It seems that I've underestimated the state of things a bit. Sigil didn't apologize for the actions of his family, nor did Theron really feel like he should have to either. I already expected this to happen. Your sympathy is unnecessary. Sigil chuckled. Why are you bringing this up now, then? I'm very interested in understanding something. But Burn is a very annoying handler to have. I have no interest in dealing with him, and he will make my sacrifice worthless. For the second time, the old man looked over. Theron was well and truly towing a very dangerous line right now, one that had already stirred his killing intent, not once, but twice already. That's twice already, Sigil said with a smile. Old Man Baron has been with me since I was a child. He truly doesn't react to much. Theron shrugged. I'm only speaking the truth. There's no secret that he and I have never seen eye to eye. Burn is my father's most trusted advisor. He won't even listen to my words over his. In addition, if Burn doesn't trust you even with his soul imprint in place, it can only mean that he has a very good reason. His reason is that I am too talented and he's worried that I can't be controlled. And what does that have to do with me? Nothing. Like I said, I'm just very interested in something that I doubt I can claw out of him. Sigil raised an eyebrow. And that is imbued resonance. What is that? Theron's eyes sparkled with curiosity. For the first time, he actually did look like a 14-year-old boy. Sigil blinked for a moment, and then erupted into a fit of laughter. He laughed so hard he wiped tears from his cheeks. Old Man Baron once more went back to not paying attention. Theron blinked for a while. What? Did I say something funny? No. No. Sigil tried to catch his breath. It's just that never mind. I thought you were about to ask me for family secrets or something. Imbued resonance is not a secret. You probably only haven't learned about it because it doesn't appear often in books circulated amongst mortals. Third and fourth year Martial Stream books mention it all the time. The secret of imbued resonance is the first part of its moniker. Those that reach imbued resonance can mimic the abilities and control of imbued Mancer beasts. Sometimes that is literal, as in it comes from echoes. At other times, it's not so literal. Flux Mancers, for example, can reach imbued resonance with their fists or their weapons. Elemental Mancers are more on the literal side of things and can touch shocking levels of control with their elements. The Ironhearts, you'll meet some today, are an excellent example. Earthmancy has an incredibly high ceiling, but an incredibly low floor at the same time. There's earth mana literally all around us, and in large quantities at that, unlike wind mana. But the heavens are fair and balanced. Because of this, controlling earth mana imbued into the ground is incredibly difficult. The Ironhearts, however, can imbue their mana into the ground, converting the earth mana and controlling it with far greater ease. This is imbued resonance. Theron's eyes glowed from start to finish, hanging on every word. Of course, it can get much more complicated. For example, soul and spirit mancers, due to their proximity and affinity with flux mancers, can sometimes gain their sort of imbued resonance abilities too, and vice versa. Flux and elemental mancers are on opposite sides of the spectrum, so we usually have no luck in that regard. But we have a small chance at some soul mancer abilities like treasure control and such. Sigil paused. Seems I've spoken too much. It's your time to be introduced now, go on. Theron snapped out of his intent listening and stood. Thank you for the explanation. See you soon. With that, he turned and left for the banquet. The curiosity in Theron's eyes faded as he entered the long hallway. He could hear the bustle of festivities in the distance, and a herald's voice was already announcing his achievements to the crowd. His gait, however, didn't speed up. As expected, imbued resonance is more of an open secret. After Theron combed through Manson's memories, he got that vibe as well, so he thought it was the perfect opening volley towards Sigil. While he was, indeed, curious about what imbued resonance was, it wasn't to the point of taking such a risk without reason or cause. The words he had chosen today were very deliberate. Thanks to Manson, Theron had learned 3 very important things. The first was that imbued resonance wasn't as shocking a secret as he thought it might be, though he felt that there was likely a reason it was still so protected. Theron had never seen something so sinister before. Just for comparison, he had a full understanding of maybe every special herb and plant beneath Goldgrade. Logically, these should be no less valuable than the information about imbued resonance. So why was one so protected while the other wasn't? The answer wouldn't come today, but something else certainly would. In fact, all 3 tidbits of information Theron had learned would be very useful tonight. The second was that Sigil wasn't the only candidate for heirship of the Thistle clan. He was the most talented of his father's sons, but there were various uncles and cousins in the main family line as well. There were 2 others with no less talent than Sigil himself. His path to patriarch wasn't guaranteed, and much like his father before him, he would need to build his own coalition. Theron obviously hadn't come right out and said it, but that was why his mention of imbued resonance was so perfect. Sigil would assume that that was what he really wanted to know, while the seed of taking him in as a real vassal would be planted. In such a situation, wouldn't he gain a small bit of leverage? As for the third thing he had learned, well, that would play itself out very soon. A young genius that's already accumulated a shocking 39 credits in just his first year. Please welcome Theron Gale Thunder. Theron took a step out from a curtain, stepping through. Light beamed down on him, a great number of gazes landing on his young face. Curiosity, intrigue, doubt, disdain, animosity, indifference. Colors of an emotional spectrum painted the room, bending, bowing, and shifting the mana in the air. Theron couldn't help but wonder how a spirit mancer might see this sort of crowd. OS. The pressure didn't stop him from calmly scanning the crowd, though. He wanted to understand just what he would be facing tonight. His Imperial Scholar robes fluttered beneath the waves of pressure. One after another, he met the gazes of those that looked toward him, his expression gentle, his eyes difficult to read. Theron found Thessa in the crowd. But more interestingly than that, Soren and Tegan, who usually followed her around, were instead on the far opposite side of the table. Interesting. It wasn't the separation that mattered to him. It was likely that since this wasn't a sect setting, their noble statuses meant far more than their shared disciplehood. In that case, Thessa being promised to a nightingale would place her status on a completely separate level from them. Though it was doubtful Thessa was here under that status, given the circumstances, she had to be from a decent noble clan herself to warrant a prince's attention. That said, it was the fact Thessa was here at all, especially when Yanaway had only just tried to kill her a month ago, that was of real interest. Now that he thought about it, this was the first time he was seeing her in quite a while. Theron smiled and gave her a nod. Thessa was a bit taken aback, but then quickly looked away. Though he raised an internal eyebrow, Theron didn't think much of it as he swept his gaze through the last and final group. He had left them for one final purpose. Their gazes were the most intent, their presences looming the largest. The Ironheart Earldom, the Vermouth Earldom, the Ashenvale Earldom, and finally, the Thistle Marquisette clan. Amongst the Vermouth, Theron pretty quickly spotted Malaya and gave her a small smile as well. Malaya blushed, lowering her head quickly. A young man by her side that bore some resemblance raised an eyebrow, and then gave Theron another look. But he said nothing at all. He seemed a year or two older than Malaya, but on his lapel there was the insignia of the Lamincent Moon Sect, meaning he wasn't in the Imperial Academy. That isn't a normal insignia. He is a core disciple. Core disciples were only beneath Chosen. As far as Theron knew, the Chosen for the Lamincent Moon Sect for this generation had yet to be selected, which meant that all things considered, this young man had a very good chance at it. His cultivation was at worst at the higher silver resonance levels. Someone this powerful wasn't expected by Theron at all. It seemed that there would be quite some fireworks tonight. Each noble clan seemed to have at least one young noble of this caliber with them. The Ashenvale had sent forward two incredibly pale-faced young women that looked like a pair of elder and younger sisters, while the Ironheart clan, well, they too had sent forward two people, but Theron was only interested in the younger of them, a young man with a row of grinning silver teeth. He wore a suit, but the sleeve had been ripped off, revealing a chiseled pair of arms lined with silver tattoos. His hair spiked up in all directions as though he had just been shocked, and there was a fiery blaze in his bronze eyes. Every time he moved, heavy brass bracelets that looked far too large to have successfully stayed on his wrists rattled, but one would be quick to find out that there were more pairs around his ankles as well, hovering above his bare feet. It looked like he had been forced into formal attire, only for him to rip them apart with his bare hands. This could only be one young man, Thaurix Ironheart. Thaurix grinned wildly at Theron, clinking what looked like silver nails turned claws on the table. It tore into the delicate fabric that adorned it. Theron met his gaze calmly. There was nothing at all on Thaurix's body that denoted he was part of any sort of sect or Imperial Academy. But most often, this was the most fearsome sort of opponent. It was a young talent of family, didn't want to be influenced by any others. These were existences that were likely beyond Chosen in many instances, young elites that a family would pour all their resources into if given the chance. Sigil was almost certainly such an existence before Dean Thistle chose to bring him forward. Presenting Sigil like this, there was obviously just a single purpose: to display dominance. That was how confident Dean Thistle was in his son. Of course, this was all relative. A talent in earldom would keep in-house likely couldn't be comparable to a talent a Marquisette would. How talented Thaurix truly was, well, Theron's blade would have to test that. Theron took a seat by the seat of honor. Of all those here, he probably had the second most prominent position, and yet he didn't have a name any of them recognized. sitting there on an elevated platform, when there was no doubt geniuses here that also came from families that had secretly submitted to the thistles, was bound to bring forth ire. If Theron noticed it, though, he didn't seem to react much at all. The herald's horn finally came to a stop. And now, I will introduce the main character of today's events, a young talent you've likely heard quite a great deal about. Stepping into the Imperial Academy and completing 33 credits in a single bound, not wasting even a second day, his legend has long since spread far and wide. Some of you know him as young Master Sigil. Some of you might call him Imperial Scholar Thistle. I know him simply as young heir, a young man truly bound for greatness. Please help me welcome young noble Sigil Thistle. It wasn't long before Sigil walked out with a smile, standing before the seat of honor right beside where Theron sat. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I'm endlessly grateful that so many young elites have chosen to come to my banquet today. It is an honor like no other. He reached for a cup of wine before him, raising it high up. I'll do my best to be the greatest host I can. I hope your time here tonight will be some of the best times you've had. Many raised their cups along with Sigil, Theron being no exception. Then they downed their cups. Sigil took a seat with a wide grin. Come, dancers, music, ambience. Every clap of his hands brought another shudder to the room. Wooden panels writhed, roots moving and shifting. It didn't take the geniuses present to realize that this was a display of Sigil's mana control, and that it was. So all-encompassing, such a wide range, and yet so delicate and unforced. A sextet of scantily clad dancers rose up, with vines wrapping around their bodies, until 6 separate platforms were formed around the room. Each one began to dance in an elegant rhythm all on their own. At the center of the banquet, in between the arrangement of 2 long tables, a wooden platform opened up to allow a band to rise up from the ground. At the same time, roots curling through the ceiling fell from above, their flowers budding and shimmering with light as the main lights of the dining hall fell to silence. It all happened together in a single instant, and even Theron found his eyes narrowing. Mana control was his specialty. He didn't think he lost to anyone in his own generation. But this range and sheer quantity, he couldn't match up to such a thing yet. Sigil might be on the verge of the Middle Silver Resonance tiers, but he was a genius for a reason. His vast stores of mana might already match up to many Middle Silver Resonance geniuses on the verge of the higher tiers. It was just a simple motion, just 4 claps of the hand, and yet every ripple was imprinted onto their souls. Sigil sat back in his chair, not even pale-faced. Then, he leaned over to Theron. Now it seems I won't have to do anything else tonight. Clever, don't you think, little brother? Saves me so much work. Theron smiled. Your range is something else. My range, huh? It seems you're not very impressed by my control, Sigil said jokingly. I don't think anyone is a match for me in control, Theron said with a chuckle. Yeah. Sigil grinned, a light of competition sparking in his eyes. The two joked about it for a bit longer, but Theron knew that with Sigil's pride, he would never actually challenge him until they were on equal footing. As far as he was concerned, anyone otherwise would be meaningless. It's not like I have a choice, Theron said. Water mana isn't good for combat. Without control, I have nothing. I understand what you mean. But before my ancestors, wood mana was also not good for combat, Sigil grinned. There was a sparkle in Theron's eyes when he heard this. Then, he slowly nodded, his gaze becoming a bit absent. Indeed, there was no reason the Thistles should have such great defenses or combat abilities. But they did. Teacher Vibra's path was also exceptionally interesting. Honestly speaking, Theron thought that path had even more potential than the ones the Thistles were on now. If he was a Woodmancer, he would certainly pick it. Sigil allowed Theron's thoughts to churn, and he found himself genuinely smiling. Theron was certainly an interesting character and reminded him a lot of himself. They were both prideful, but neither was arrogant. Young noble, a voice came from the tables ahead. Sigil looked up, smiling when he noticed it was the vermouth beside Malaya speaking. This is quite the friendship you have with young Theron. I'm very curious. How did you two become so close? Sigil chuckled. It's rare for young Master Aaron to be so interested in someone else. I was certain you were a man of few words. Aaron smiled politely, his gaze landing on Theron after another glance at Malaya. I'm just curious. Theron looked quite calm on the surface, but he was still calculating something. When he used Malaya back then, his intentions were quite obvious. He needed a cover for his movements, a reason to be at the Purple Scale Tea House, and an alibi following Yanawe's death. Of course, he had thought about what it would mean to choose Malaya as well. He had known Malaya was a vermouth back then, so why would he choose her specifically? The answer was obvious as well. He knew that, as a noble woman, she couldn't control her own marriage. In addition, her personality was quite soft and pliable, so it would be easy to get in and get out without too many strings attached. Although she would be sad for a while, that wouldn't be because she had actual feelings for him. Instead, she would just feel bad about not reciprocating. While there was a chance that she could fall for him, what did that have to do with him? With how docile she was, she would be unlikely to pursue it because she wouldn't want to disappoint her parents. An overprotective elder brother, though, that was out of his calculations. Even he couldn't account for everything, least of all for such a thing to appear right here and now. Unfortunately for him, Malaya was terrible at hiding her emotions and even worse at lying. Depending on how close she was with her brother, she was one session of questioning away from spilling everything. Would that be bad for Theron? Not necessarily, but that would also depend on how overprotective they were talking. I actually haven't known little brother for long, but we are kindred spirits. I believe we vibe together quite well. Oh, you call him little brother? High praise indeed. Aaron looked toward Theron again, his smile deepening. Theron, is it? Theron smiled. Yes, that's me. I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I know you. I'm not familiar with most here. This is my first time in such a setting. Please forgive me. Not to worry, Aaron chuckled. I am Aaron Vermouth, core disciple of the Luminescent Moon sect. I am Malaya's elder brother. I'm sure you know her. I do. Theron nodded without missing a beat, while Malaya turned as red as an apple. Malaya and I managed to claim 3 credits together at an academic stream debate. She played a huge role, carrying a little first year like me. Malaya's lips parted to refute, but her tongue didn't seem to be working properly right now. She just kept jamming her covert fingers against her brother's waist, but that only made Aaron press on all the more. Oh, is that where you know her from? Aaron blinked, as though in surprise. Theron blinked. Yes, of course. That, I believe, is when we first interacted. Have you taken a liking to my sister, Theron? This time Malaya yanked on her brother's arm hard. There didn't seem to be anything malicious in Aaron's words, and the banquet was still lively. The music continued, the dancers moved, and the mood was good. But there were still quite a number paying attention. Who could miss something so interesting? The 2 sisters of the Ashenvale clan giggled, but didn't say too much. As for Thaurix, he was sinking his sharp silver teeth into a huge leg of meat and seemed to be the only one that truly didn't care. What surprised them all, though, was that Theron's reaction was quite quick and didn't carry the slightest hint of nervousness. What is there not to like about your sister? She is beautiful, demure, and has a heart of gold. It is unfortunate that I have no fate with her. Even Aaron was a bit taken aback. To Theron's side, Sigil was grinning ear to ear like some sort of proud elder brother, while Malaya almost hit her head against her plate of food. She would have dug beneath the table if she wasn't sure that that would make the situation even more embarrassing for her. Aaron recovered quickly, a dangerous smile spreading across his face. And what do you mean by that? Theron tilted his head to the side in confusion, as though he didn't know why Aaron was confused. I've spoken to Malaya about it quite plainly. I was open with how I felt. Unfortunately, she isn't at liberty to control her own marriage. I did not want to come between her and her clan, so what else can I do but take a step back? My parents died early. I have no family or background. I can only build one myself. Unfortunately, Malaya cannot wait for me to do such a thing. That is not her fault but mine. Aaron didn't reply immediately, but the danger in his smile faded. It seemed that he had jumped to an improper conclusion. Throwing a glance at his little sister and seeing her face buried beneath her hair, her ears poking out like 2 steaming hot tomatoes, He was caught between laughter and guilt. A silence fell for a moment. What a useless conversation. Thaurix interjected, meat juices falling from his lips and chin like blood. He spoke with his mouth half full without regard for anything. If you want to fuck a bitch, then fuck her. Once the rice is cooked, what can her brother say? Sounds to me like you're a pussy. Theron's gaze slowly turned to Thaurix, who was half devouring his food, half looking at him. Just look at a certain princess consort that's here. She only just now realized that distancing herself from her reverse harem was probably smart. Women these days don't care about their reputations anyway, so why should you guard it for them? A flare of rage surfaced on Thessa's face before she buried it just as fast as it came. Oh my, I'm sorry. There's not enough food here, and when I'm hungry, my mouth runs on its own. But I really would be too embarrassed to send my princess consort here if she couldn't even take a main seat. What embarrassing woman. Theron raised an eyebrow. Many, whether by accident or in subterfuge, looked toward Thessa at that moment. Soren and Tegan both clenched their utensils, but didn't say a word, burying their heads in a food as though this might help them forget what was going on around them. Theron hadn't thought that Thessa's princess consort status would be exposed like this. At the very least, not in such a crude fashion. In reality, this was the only logical path to take after her attempted assassination failed. There was no point in hiding her identity anymore if people were already aware of who she was. If you have something to say to me, say it boldly and proudly, Thessa said coldly. Thralix blinked as though confused why Thessa could possibly be angry with him. Didn't I already say what I wanted to say? If he wants her, he just needs to find a good time to fuck her. Threaten her parents a little bit with ruining her reputation, then poof, he'll have the wife he wants. Clearly he's too busy bullshitting people to do any of that. Aaron's dangerous smile had returned. Drystan, I would advise you get your little cousin to watch his mouth, or I'll be happy to show him the difference between the bronze and silver resonance. Crack. Thralix's silver teeth shattered a leg bone half the width of his face with a bite, the splintering pieces revealing a drooling bone marrow within. If you want to address me directly, Thralix said with a savage grin. I'm not like certain other ball-less cowards here, but you certainly are more stupid. Thessa's voice had been several degrees colder. Theron sat back in his own seat, watching this unfold. It was fascinating to him. He couldn't feel them, but he was sure there were a large number of gold mancers keeping an eye on this place, each one charged with the protection of these little nobles. In Epsilon, all the while, these clans were allowing their youths to battle it out. Sigil had been sent here to assert dominance. So what was Thessa sent here for? Was it the same? Thessa's eyes lit ablaze as she stood to her feet, her palm rattling the table beneath her. The crown has just been insulted, Thessa said coldly. I'm sure young noble Sigil won't mind this princess consort reminding a little earldom of their place, correct? Theron's eyes narrowed. This wasn't the Thessa he knew. Clearly, there were quite a few people around him playing characters. As much as he thought himself to be sharp, he wasn't sharp enough. If Thessa managed to take the reins of the banquet so easily, it would certainly flip things on its head. Much of Sigil's earlier display would also become useless. This was a clash between rebel and crown. And more importantly than that, should Sigil lose, it would be a hard blow to come back from. That was because he wouldn't be losing to the crown prince. He would be losing to his betrothed. They certainly have quite some confidence in Thessa. But why? He had seen her battle. She was nothing special. And then he recalled something. Fire mana. It was the perfect counter to metal mana, but that wasn't the most important point. Just why had Thessa hidden her abilities back then? Sigil chuckled. My oh my, you're certainly putting me in a tough spot. The moment Sigil began to speak, Theron could feel that he wasn't sure how to deal with the situation. Sigil didn't even want to be here. Political savvy was obviously not his forte. I wonder, Theron thought, just how far back does this go? Was Thessa in on Sadie's slip-up even back then too? Why would the two even coordinate something like that if it was the case? Theron suddenly chuckled. They really are driving you into a corner. Sigil blinked, giving Theron a look as though to see if he had anything to pull him out of this. You have an idea, little brother? Why not? I was bragging so much earlier about control. So instead of ruining the ambience, we can just have a little competition of mana control. Sigil shook his head, picking up on something. That would probably be unfair. We've all heard that Thralix has already awakened his Ironheart bloodline to silver resonance and gained an imbued resonance. He'll have too much of an advantage. Theron shook his head. That's ridiculous. This is the princess consort we're talking about. How could she lose because of an earldom's bloodline? Sigil smiled. Indeed, this little brother of his was too sharp for his own good. Even he might be goaded into such a thing. But the goad wasn't what was all that important. It was the intent. If Thessa had come here to assert dominance, she couldn't possibly back down from something like this, right? Thessa sneered, her eyes boring holes into Theron. Flames licked about in the depths of her eyes, her black hair slowly raising and then falling down to the small of her back once more. Something seemed to be burned away from her, and in that moment, she without a doubt became the most radiant woman in the room. It was hard to fathom just how they hadn't realized just how beautiful she was until this moment. Sensory perception nullification, Theron calmly analyzed. I wonder what form it took. I do not mind a battle of mana control to keep the peace, so long as the loser presents their head to the victor. That should keep it peaceful enough for you, right? Bang! Thralix stood as quick as lightning, his chair shattering beneath him. The table would have shattered as well, if not for the fact it was made of wood, and Sigil had lightly tapped a finger. Do you think I'm afraid of a slut? Thessa suddenly slapped out with a palm, but it wasn't toward Thralix at all. Instead, Soren and Tegan were ripped into the air, dangling by thrashing vines of fire. Before they could react, a line of flames pierced their foreheads, ripping out a bundle of fluttering, cotton-like white energy. Have either of you ever defiled my innocence? She asked coldly. Like dull zombies, they spoke out at the same time. No! Bang! The vines of fire squeezed down, and a rain of blood fell. Now you, come to die. Her fury had reached such a peak that her hair danced in an unknown wind. Theron's pupils had constricted into pinholes. That isn't fire mana. That's fire spirit mana. Thessa wasn't a firemancer. She was a spirit mancer. Not only was she a spirit mancer, she was a quasi-silver spirit mancer that had already integrated an echo. Not only had she integrated an echo before the silver resonance, but it was an extremely rare fire spirit with a soul, allowing her to combine her spirit mancer abilities with that of a fire mancer, seamlessly gaining the best of both worlds. Theron realized then that he had completely underestimated her. This card that the Nightingale kept in their back pocket was truly something else. Inwardly, he smiled. Perfect. Theron truly didn't expect that he would see such a thing here. Spirit Mancer cultivation methods were rare, so rare that even a talent like Burn was left aside by the thistles for so long. So, just what kind of background did Thessa have to use such methods? Fusing with an echo before Silvermancy. I have a feeling that this isn't natural. It's more likely that she had a cultivation method that requires it. Maybe when she enters Silvermancy, she will replace this fire spirit with another. Or maybe the process of entering Silvermancy itself requires a silver-grade fire spirit. If Thessa knew that Theron had figured out her cultivation method with a glance, it was unknown how she would react. But what was certain for now was that she was out for murder. No, she had already murdered. Theron looked at the blood that splattered across the ground. The musicians, coated in crimson gore, froze, and many others stopped with them. To the side, the dancers screamed, shuddering and huddling down on their wooden platforms. Aaron slowly stood to his feet. I do not care who you are. Killing 2 disciples of my luminescent moon sect is absolutely unacceptable. The core disciple seemed to be truly enraged. Soren and Tegan were completely innocent, but just for a little bit of reputation, she had actually killed them so openly and without regard for the face of the sect. The righteous indignation of Aaron was palpable. It was easy for Theron to tell at a glance, especially from the way he protected his little sister, that this was a man who always wore his heart on his sleeve. Maybe it was only natural he reacted like this despite the risks. Unfortunately, he didn't even get the chance to move when a shadow suddenly appeared before him. Their face was obscured by a mask of swirling black, a cloak just as dark adorning their body. The figure didn't say a word, but Aaron could feel a suffocating pressure pressing down on him. A cold sweat formed on his brow, his heart beating erratically. It wasn't until Malaya pulled his sleeve hard, pushing him into his chair, that he finally escaped the pressure. "Are you okay, big brother?" Malaya asked softly. The cloaked, shadowy figure vanished into thin air as though they had never been there. Aaron didn't get a chance to respond before Thessa spoke again. "It seems that many of you have forgotten, but let me remind you. This land is ruled by the Nightingale clan. My hand has been promised to the Crown Prince. I, the princess consort of the Nightingale clan, will not accept any form of disrespect. The punishment is death." Bang! Thalrix landed heavily on the platform from which the musicians had long been scattered, leaving their blood-soaked instruments behind. "Enough talk," he growled. "Little pussy, what are the rules of this mana control competition?" To the side, Theron raised an eyebrow. "Young Master Thalrix, I think you've been quite the agitator today already, don't you think?" Sigil's voice echoed coldly. The platform Thalrix stood on trembling just the slightest bit, as though to remind him that Sigil could kill him whenever he so pleased. Thalrix looked down beneath his feet, his eyes narrowing slightly. "It's fine," Theron said with a light smile, "since he dares be so rude even to the princess consort. Then who am I to complain? I can only hope he keeps his head." Yes, Thessa and Thalrix both looked to Theron together, as though the two of them were both surprised that he would say such a thing. But Theron didn't seem to notice. "The rules can be quite simple, a mana wrestling match. Each of you formed this quantity of mana." Theron raised a finger and a sphere of water slowly rotated into being until it was a perfectly smooth blue ball about a foot across. It didn't have even the slightest ripple across its surface as it rotated. Simply press your balls of mana against one another, and whoever crushes the other first wins. Thalrix and Thessa both snorted, raising their fingers. Their mana swirled into being. Thessa's mana swirled into a sparkling red-gold flame, and Thalrix's crumpled into what looked like an enormous bit of tin foil. It was clear at a glance that neither one was comparable to Theron. Thessa's flames still licked out from time to time like the arcs of solar flares, while Thalrix's, well, it was an unsightly piece of work to be sure. Without saying a single word, who was superior and inferior was clear at a glance, and both could only be lucky that they weren't facing off against Theron instead. Even Sigil, by Theron's side, couldn't help but narrow his eyes. Was that a ball of water mana? Or was it a polished marble? Which was it? "Ready? You can begin when my water sphere bursts apart," Theron said calmly. His finger flexed, and the sphere shot into the air above the duo. 3, 2. Theron snapped his fingers, and a misty rain fell from above, avoiding the two. It wouldn't be very fair if he doused Thessa now, would it? Both spheres shot forward at once. Bang! They collided in the air, sparks of fire and molten droplets of metal sprinkling out. Sigil tapped a foot, and a barrier appeared around the tables to protect the spectators. It was clear that he had been ready for something like this to happen this evening, even though it had occurred in such an unexpected way. Theron watched calmly as the two balls wrestled against one another. The type advantage here was clear, but everything was relative. Thalrix's metal might melt in part, but that didn't mean it would melt all the way through. Plus, he was able to make his mana far more dense due to the nature of metal mana to begin with. By comparison, fire mana was far more volatile and harder to compress. Doing so was like forming a bomb in real time. It might have the most explosive offensive strength of the four base elements, but that came at a price. Unfortunately for Thalrix, this wasn't normal fire mana. The two spheres of mana seemed to be at a stalemate. Thalrix had the density advantage, and as much as Thessa melted the layers of his tinfoil ball away, the poor folding actually helped him. There were so many air pockets in Thalrix's ball that the fire couldn't pass on its heat evenly and efficiently. In fact, after observing for a while, though Theron knew that Thalrix couldn't make a ball as smooth as his own, he could certainly do much better than this. It was clear that Thalrix was a genius for a reason. The most important point, though, was that while Thessa's fire mana seemed to flick away and vanish into the wind easily from time to time, Thalrix would take control of the cooled molten mana that flaked from his tinfoil ball and slap them back on. Slowly, Thessa's ball of fire became smaller, while Thalrix's own, while having shrunk a small bit, had remained relatively the same size. A sneer came from Thalrix, the painted lights of orange and red dancing across his silver teeth and tattoos in the somber lighting. He could feel that victory was approaching. You know, maybe if you strip from me, I'll forgive you and won't take your head. But I'm a man of the people first and foremost, so you'll have to give us all a little show. After the first goading got a reaction out of her, Thessa had hardly reacted with anything other than cold, ruthless efficiency afterward. Even hearing these words now, her expression didn't change or shift in the slightest. As much heat as her mana was giving off, she was cold. Frigidly so. Her flame seemed stoked by something else entirely. It seems that it's time to end this. She finally spoke after the third wave of Thalrix's taunts. She allowed him to rise to a high, riding on a wave of arrogance and complacency. But now, he would pay. Chi, chi, chi. Sparking embers suddenly erupted. Not from the air, not from Thessa, but from within Thalrix's tinfoil ball. There was a sudden change to Thalrix's expression, but it was too late. Fascinating, Theron thought. She can control the heat of her flames through her soul itself. This is far more control than any firemancer has. She allowed Thalrix to think the bits of metal had cooled down, while in reality the kernel of her flames was still in there. Then, when the time was right, bang! The tinfoil ball exploded. Thalrix crossed his arms in front of himself, protecting his face and using his mana control to send the tidbits of shrapnel curving away from him. Pung, 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 pung. The rebounding echoes pelted across the barriers, a violent upswell of shuddering, quaking mana filling the air. Thessa unleashed an enraged shriek, as though all her compressed fury was erupting all at once. Her body flashed, appearing above Thalrix and slapping down. A flaming palm crashed down from above, expanding so fast it was already the size of Thalrix's body by the time it collided. In the same fluid motion, Thessa used her other hand to flip a palm, pulling out a sword that instantly erupted into flames. She didn't even wait to see the result of the palm, slashing down with all her might. There was no chance to succeed. Sigil had already tapped a foot, a covert barrier of wood appearing around Thalrix. The Ironheart were soon to become a subordinate of his Thistle clan, and he couldn't allow their best genius to die so easily. Inwardly, he sighed. He really hated politics. Bang! Thessa's blade rebounded against something hard, but through all the flames, she couldn't see exactly what it was and wasn't sure that Sigil had interfered. But it didn't take a genius like her to make a guess at that. She was sent flying back, her wrists rattling beneath the pressure. Her thoughts were already swirling with how to attack again when a figure suddenly appeared before Thalrix, waving a hand. The flames and wood all dispersed at once, making it impossible to see that Sigil had ever interfered in the first place. Thessa landed heavily on the ground and was still about to risk everything to burst forth once more, but a large back had long blocked her way. The cloaked figure. A stalemate. Two hidden mansers stood across from one another, their charges to their backs. It was clear that neither had the intention of stepping aside. Thessa huffed for breath. So the Ironhearts don't know how to keep their word. I don't know why I expected anything else from a little earldom. Her words dripped with venom, her fury lacing through them all. The cloaked figure before Thalrix didn't say anything even after their young master stood to his feet, wiping his mouth of blood. There were tidbits of metal sticking out of him, but it was clear that he hadn't suffered any substantial injury at all. He sneered. I don't remember agreeing to give you my head, slut. Bang! A slap turned Thalrix's head. The cloaked figure that stood to protect him didn't say a word, just turning and thrusting out a palm. After this, he threw a spatial ring forward and then took Thalrix by the arm, vanishing. Thessa trembled with rage, but there was nothing she could do. She had known things would end like this. It was why she had attacked so fiercely and without hesitation. In the end, it still wasn't enough. Theron watched all of this calmly by the side. As the proceedings continued, there didn't seem to be anything nearly as entertaining that would occur, and the night waned with nothing more than empty, small talk and Malaya doing everything she could to avoid eye contact with him. The Ashenvale sisters, though, seemed quite eager to get to know Theron, taking turns to see which of them could fluster him first to no avail. And like this, the banquet ended. As for the winner, all that could be said was that it was an unfortunate debut for young Noble Sigil. Thessa sat in a hall on the ground, her head buried into the fabric of her dress. Her wails filled the hall, tears streaking down her face. My best friends, my best friends. Soren, Tegan, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. The heart-wrenching cries of a broken heart echoed, and yet a stone-cold figure stood right next to her in a cloak of black, reacting as though it hadn't heard a single thing. The moon hung high in the skies, rain pelting down from above as though the heavens were in a furious rage. Theron sat silently on a rock, his mind at peace, his eyes shockingly cold. He was right there. Anyone should have been able to see him, sitting on the side of a dirt road on a boulder without the slightest hint of concealment. And yet, maybe even a goldmancer might accidentally overlook him right now. Others might choose to stay in on a night like this. For him, though, he felt the most at peace in this rain. His mind was calmer. His thoughts were clearer. His blade was sharper. A carriage rattled in the distance. Fuck! Thralix almost shattered a panel, but his fist was stopped by Drystan. Again, that's the last time I stop you, Thralix. I'm not your babysitter, Drystan said coldly, beginning to grow tired of Thralix's antics. If you shatter this carriage, you'll be walking in the rain alone, naked and cold. I will strip every fucking thing off of you, try me. Who the fuck are you to talk to me like that? Someone who's stronger than you. Try remembering that sometime. You sure have a lot of balls. Whatever. Surpass me first, then you can talk about what you're going to do. All I see is a child with an overbloated ego, and now your bullshit has cost the family. Do you have any idea the kind of loss we suffered tonight? Thralix finally fell into silence. If there was one person he was actually afraid of, it was his father. No, his mother was probably even scarier. When he thought about the grilling he would have to endure when he returned home, he felt a pit drop into the bottom of his stomach, and he almost lashed out again. But this time, it was a flare of Dristan's aura that stopped him. He exhaled a breath and looked out toward the pelting rain. There was a reason they were still on this road despite having left so early. After being taken away by Old Man Mona, they had been pulled into a meeting with Dean Thistle. With the Q10. The dean hadn't said much, and pretty much only spoke to Drystan directly. Being there, Thralix had never felt so small in his life. He had always been the center of attention, the genius, and yet this man didn't even care to look at him a single time. In the end, the agreement was for him to enroll into the Imperial Academy, which required more bullshit and preparation. It was only after all of that bureaucracy was settled that they could finally rumble back to their hotel. But going to the Thistle's main manor meant leaving city grounds, so now they were on their way back. It had been nothing but a night of absolute frustrations. He wanted nothing more than to sleep, and yet he had no idea if he would even be able to sleep once he hit his pillow. It was that sort of dreadful, terrible night, and it suddenly got worse. Chee! The sound was so subtle that it was impossible to hear beneath the pelting rain from mortals. In fact, even Thralix didn't hear it, only Drystan did. His head turned, but it was too late. Thralix froze, his body not even having a chance to convulse before it slid down his neck, plopping onto the ground. Drystan stared in shock, the blade mana rebounding off his body. It tore into his robes and left a faint mark across his skin, but it was as though he hadn't sensed it at all, unable to take his eyes off the corpse before him. Even when the carriage came to a grinding halt, skidding across the road and then tipping over, his gaze didn't shift. Only when the rain began to pelt through the cracks and shattered windows, the blood that had splattered across his face being wiped away by its relentless barrage, did he awaken. Drystan roared to the skies, his eyes looking in the direction the blade had come and dashing out with full force. He knew that Old Man Mona had long since moved, but logic wasn't driving his actions right now. He was annoyed by Thralix, but only in the same way a big brother would nag his little brother. Only he was allowed to do such a thing, and he certainly wouldn't harm Thralix to any substantial degree. Even if someone looked at Thralix wrong, he would erupt into a furious tirade. To kill him? That was absolutely unacceptable. Absolutely unacceptable. Theron dashed through the forest, his eyes leaving blue streaks in his wake that matched the changing tides of the moon's ripples. He shifted and moved with a shocking agility, but he knew that he would be instantly caught at this pace. He was no match for the speed of Silvermancer, let alone a Goldmancer. It was a good thing, then, that they were running in the wrong direction. Sure, his mana had come from that side of the road, but who said anything about him sitting on that side? As for the aura they were chasing, it was little more than rippling mists of touch a mirage. They thought that they were seeing through a pitiful technique by a cultivator much weaker than them, when in reality they were just seeing through something he wanted them to. Of course, they would realize the difference very soon, but by then, it would be too late. Theron's ability to mask his aura in the rain, especially when Vein Song was activated, couldn't be explained in a few words. If they didn't know exactly where he was, then what chance did they stand? Which was all the more reason why it was shocking when Theron appeared at the wreckage of the carriage. He calmly took a seat within, the pelting rain above him like a tonic for his very soul. Calmly, he stored Thralix's head in a sack. Then he brought out his dagger, drawing across the corpse's chest. The character for River pulsed with a subtle vitality before fading. Theron returned to his dorm room that night, without much fanfare. But what he didn't expect was for a certain teacher Byrne to be standing there, waiting for him. A powerful aura descended onto Theron the moment he appeared, causing him to narrow his eyes. "Why are you late in returning?" Byrne asked coldly. Theron didn't reply directly, pointing to the skies. "Is it not a beautiful night? Why would I return so soon?" Byrne frowned. Who would call this a beautiful night? It was the worst night to be out. But seeing how dry Theron's clothes were, he faintly understood something. And that was when his heart shook. Eighth resonance? He didn't even mean to say the words out loud, but they slipped without his prior knowledge. For a Goldmancer to make such a mistake, one could guess the level of shock he was in. "I was already close before," Theron replied simply. No, you were not. It seems that your senses are lacking a bit. Teacher, what did you say to me?" Byrne growled, the pressure on Theron increasing. "I think that instead of growing so infuriated with me, you should instead thank me for saving your Thistle clan from an even more embarrassing loss tonight. But if you're more interested in relying on worthless nobles instead of real geniuses, you're free to go out and lose more." Bang! Theron fell to a knee, the soul imprint in his body burning with a furious light. It practically felt like he was being burned all the way through him. "Have you remembered your place yet?" Byrne's voice boomed, nearly causing Theron's forehead to smash to the ground. Seeing his head finally matted in the rain, its relentless pelting beginning to soak him through, he finally felt a small hint of satisfaction, until he almost heard Theron sneer through his voice. "Whatever helps you feel better, oh great teacher." Byrne's eyes flashed with fury, and he raised a palm, ready to kill Theron right then and there. It almost got his head, almost. In the end, his respect for Dean Thistle was too high, and it wasn't yet time to kill this boy. That, and a message jade flared in Byrne's spatial ring. The Thistle's eyes opened wide, and he dashed away without a word, not even following up on Theron's disrespect. Theron didn't even look in the direction Byrne left, his arrogant demeanor vanishing. With a flick of his finger, all the rain that had soaked him through vanished, leaving him completely dry as he walked into his dorm room. Inepsilence. His expression had an eerie calm on it. If not for the throbbing pain in his knee and his slight limp, one would have thought he hadn't gone through anything at all just now. The third tidbit of information that Theron had learned from Anson Soltai Jade was that the Ironhearts would be visiting on this date. That sounded like a worthless tidbit he should have already known, but it was vastly important That was because it was directly as a result of this tidbit that he knew where the Iron Hearts would be tonight. The heavens had chosen to smile down on him today and given him the rain. Others hated it. He relished it. Today, the legend of River would begin. But quite soon, he would start another one. Looking toward the window, the heavy rain threatening to soak even it through, a peculiar question entered his mind. He wondered, when would he be able to start Theron Galethunder's legend? Bang! 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 A chandelier fell from on high, a throne soaring through the air and shattering a pattern-adorned window. Dining room tables as heavy as small hills crumbled to pieces, and the earth reacted as though the ocean's waters were ripping and soaring into tsunami-like striations. Bring me my son back. Bring my son back to me. A headless corpse with the character River written on its chest lay in the middle of the hall. Somehow, despite all the destruction, it was the one thing entirely untouched. A woman wearing nothing but bandages across her chest and heavy lower armor stomped about, her mana flooding out in violent waves. At the entrance of the dining hall, a man stood. He was the only reason the destruction hadn't gone beyond these limits. If not, the entire manor would have long been crushed. His eyes, however, weren't on the woman, nor was there a hint of dissatisfaction in them. Instead, there was the very same endless fury alone. Looking at his son's headless corpse, he couldn't remember ever having felt so infuriated. And this actually happened under the Thistle's watch. All those promises, all that bloviating, all that arrogance. And for what? For his strongest heir to die like this? Mona, Earl Ironheart spoke in a voice that sounded like a drill grinding against heavy metal. There was a flash, and old man Mona fell to his knees before the Earl, not moving his head from the smashed position in the ground beneath it. I want nothing to do with the Thistles. Old man Mona shuddered from head to toe, understanding the implications of such words. Your head. Give it to the Nightingales in apology. Understood. The old servant didn't even try to argue. There were many good ones to be had. What if it was the Nightingales that had killed his son just so he would do exactly this? Wouldn't he be falling into their palms? But Mona knew that even for the Ironhearts who were known to be hot-blooded, there was no fool with such a high noble title. Earl Ironheart had already thought of this. It just didn't matter. If the Nightingales could do such a thing in the thick of the Thistle's territory, then the Thistles weren't worth taking a shot on. What good would his earldom be if it lost all of its heirs? But that wasn't the worst part. The blade that killed his son hadn't even scratched his nephew. That meant the Nightingales didn't just send some goldmancer. They sent a youth. They were sneering down from above, disdainful of their arrogance. The words were simple, but fierce. You think you have geniuses? Watch this. There was no rebuttal to be had. Mona waved a hand, rising up from his kneeling position and forming a blade of metal and slicing his own head off in a single motion. His body didn't collapse, remaining there in its kneeling posture. It was his final pride as a cultivator, until the rampage from the matriarch of the clan blasted what remained of him to pieces. One would never guess that the reason for tonight's chaos would be a young man calmly looking out of the window of his dorm right this moment. Theron almost felt it was a shame that he would waste a night as good as this one. It felt like there was so much more he could do, but now wasn't the time. Not yet. This region was filled with thick forestry, so rain was quite common. They were already slowly moving into the warmer months, so rain like this would only become more so. Theron wasn't a fool. How could he choose a location where he would be at a disadvantage when the entire empire had been up for his selection just months ago? He had been unlucky these last couple of weeks, as many of the important things he wanted to do had fallen on dry nights. But as rain season was coming into full force, it was his time. Right about now, the Ironhearts should have made their decision to break off with the Thistles. A fragile relationship like that wouldn't have lasted long anyway. Now, the Thistles will be in a bind. Whether they want to or not, they will have no choice but to use me. Theron's blue irises flickered. I wonder what name I should use for this one. If my Daggers of the Night persona is River, then for the Thistles will be Rain. It sounded foolish to use such a similar moniker, and the same MO felt like he was begging to be caught. But Theron had his own plans. Sadie already knew who he was. This situation wasn't as black and white as it seemed. And right now, his top priority wasn't to survive, it wasn't to set himself up for the future. It was to retrieve his father's short sword. Theron walked into Daggers of the Night with a calm gait. With his head cloaked, none recognized him, but such was the case for most. Those like Theron who used a different mask every time they came to Daggers of the Night weren't rare, and they were no less secluded than he was. But in the end, before the old man at the desk, all of their concealment was worthless. This time, the old man looked up before Theron set anything down on the table. Even after Theron did set it down, he seemed to have eyes for the chilling pair of blue orbs shrouded in the shadows of his cloak. After a long while, the old man stood to his feet. "Come with me." There was a flicker in Theron's eyes. He didn't even notice when the head on the table vanished. By the time he reacted, he could barely catch sight of the old man's back disappearing around a corner. Theron dashed after him. Theron took deep breaths. He knew the old man had done it on purpose, but it was still rare for him to be so out of breath when he wasn't training, though he guessed that he could count this as a small session. Somehow, they had left the underground space and had entered a small clearing in the forest. But even if Theron tried, he really couldn't recall how they had gotten here. It was like his mind had been bent and twisted out of proportion. Up ahead, the old man sat at a plain, circular stone table, sipping at some tea. "Took you long enough." Theron blinked in confusion. He could have sworn that he was just following the old man's back just now, wasn't he? How exactly had he ended up taking long? The realization hit Theron. Had he been following a projection this whole time? "You're too smart for your own good, but I doubt you have the full story." A movement technique. The old man paused his sip, the hot liquid almost going down the wrong pipe. Luckily, he managed to maintain his composure enough to not hack and cough, but it took all the willpower he had. Another stroke of luck was that Theron seemed to be absent-minded, trying to figure out what he had just seen. Just what sort of movement technique left such long after-images, such real, tangible, almost clone-like existences. And yet Theron, with all his mana control, couldn't even begin to tell the difference. They're not real clones, though. I'm sure of that. That technique is called Echo Plus. There's no need for you to think so much about it. You can only use it if you gain an echo from a certain rare soundmancy beast. I myself was very lucky to gain it back then. The words made Theron snap out of it, his eyes looking toward the old man with just a fraction of heat to their usual chilliness. It was mana-born, wasn't it? The old man's pupils trembled. Feral beasts, unranked, often nameless, known colloquially by most. And yet, they were normally stronger than cultivators of the same level. Imbued beast. Strong. Even Theron had to start with one at a watershed tier beneath him to get acclimated. And then he struggled with a pair afterward that were right at his cultivation level. Against normal people, though, even a 4th resonance imbued beast could crush a 6th resonance cultivator. And then, a step above, even imbued beasts were mana-born beasts. Mana-born were to imbued beasts what imbued beasts were to humans. The gap with every grade-up Emancer beast only grew more feverish, more shocking. Too smart, indeed. Theron felt a chilly, sort of killing intent lock onto him, causing him to frown. "You didn't come here to show off and then just kill me because, right?" Theron asked. "You don't know the value of a mana-born echo." Theron shrugged. "Clearly you don't either, otherwise you wouldn't bring it out so casually." The old man was tongue-tied, and his killing intent receded like a tide. "Fine, fine." He tossed a spatial ring over. "Your rewards are in there. As for the ring, keep it." Theron's eyes sparkled, but inwardly he was as calm as an ancient iceberg. A spatial device? He had many. He just couldn't use any of them, and he would likely have to add this one to that list too. "I will not teach you any of my techniques, as you do not have my echo, nor do you follow my mancy path. But I will teach you the methods of an assassin as promised. First, show me your vein song." Theron raised an eyebrow, but eventually he did as he was told. Inwardly, he was still calm, wondering how fast he should go and how long. In the end, though, he chose to go all out in terms of speed. As for his length, he wouldn't allow the old man to see that. What exactly did he have to lose? At least against an opponent like this, he stood no chance at all. The old man was prepared to comment, but then he froze. Theron's gaze had already reached a state of unprecedented concentration, and then it became dull. His entire body seemed to have disappeared where it stood, his aura waning and becoming a controlled center of mana. Right then, he was little different from an imbued beast, everything flowing naturally between nature and himself. Then, he pulled himself out seamlessly to find the old man staring at him. For a long while, there was a silence as the old man didn't say anything. This time, the latter's face was stone cold and impossible to read. If he had been surprised, there was nothing there to suggest it. He had truly become an iceberg. What do you think are the most important things you learn at Dagger's Camp? The tenets of an assassin. Don't bullshit me. I am serious. Theron replied. Then why? The tenets of an assassin were very different from the rules of the guild. They were more free-flowing and far more detailed. They couldn't be explained in just a few sentences as they distilled years of training into thick tomes. They described methods of disguise, what to do during an operation's failure, how to scout a region, and how to set traps. They encompassed all the sorts of detailed readings that Theron liked to do, and they were also among the things new recruits disregarded the most. For Theron to reply with it was like he was trying a little too hard to be a teacher's pet. At least, that was what the old man thought. Why would the most important compilation of centuries of experience not be the most important? Theron raised an eyebrow as though it was obvious. The old man was speechless again. Normally when he asked this question, the kid would get flustered trying to remember details about things they had only vaguely read. Theron didn't even bother. Is that so? The old man's eyes flickered. In that case study 0331. A case of an old man in a rocking chair. You enter the room. Sun is coming from a north-facing window. Your target is in a corner, elderly and too weak to move. The floorboards creak as you quickly sidestep to your right, not having expected such an open invitation. There is vast open land between the forest and the cabin that is your target. If there are protectors, you've almost certainly been exposed already, and yet they've allowed you to enter the room without pushback. What do? The old man's eyes narrowed. And isn't it obvious? There should be no direct sunlight coming from the north. There are only two options. The illusionist either made a mistake, or it was a necessary change. Why would it be? For others that are in hiding to understand the changed orientation of the room. The sunlight is like tag reminding them of how the room was shifted. In this case, it's a reminder that north has now become whatever direction the sunlight should be coming from, and to adjust accordingly. And then, if the man is beside the north-facing window in his rocking chair, with direct sunlight beaming down, then just attack the west corner of the room. Why not the east? Why are you so sure? The time of day is not listed in the case study. That was idiotic, by the way. The tenets are very useful, but some of the problems within it are silly. What assassin wouldn't know the time of day? But regardless, I choose to attack the west because of the floorboards creak. The light in the old man's eyes became especially sharp, waiting for Theron to continue. If the first thing I notice when coming into a room is the sunlight from the north, then I entered from the south. But we've already established that it couldn't possibly be the south. It has to be the west or east. Theron was unmoved by the words. Deep inside, he would have sneered had that been in his personality to do. He would be a fool to trust anyone who killed for a living, who knew how many women, children, and elderly the old man had killed in his life. There was no mission an assassin wouldn't take if the pay was right and the challenge suited them. When you reached the level of the old man, you had to have become so indifferent to killing that it came with your inhale and exhale. If it suited him, Theron didn't believe for a second that the old man wouldn't kill him right here and now. For him to take him under his wing meant that he needed something. It had to be remembered that this wasn't part of Theron's plans. He didn't think the old man would take him in. The fact that he dared to claim the Nightingales would be able to touch him either was an especially interesting touch. Theron couldn't help but wonder just how deep did this pool go. Still, none of that stopped a light of excitement from flashing briefly in his gaze. As much control as Theron had over his mana, His control over his expressions and emotions just might be even more shocking. And of course, such things were also in the tenets of an assassin. The old man didn't even ask Theron to kneel and acknowledge him as his disciple. Maybe amongst assassins, these things were entirely unneeded. What cultivation method do you practice? Water conventions, Theron replied. The old man's eyes narrowed. You cultivate the most widely circulated method of watermancy cultivation? It's the one that's been vetted by the most people. Theron replied simply. The old man chuckled, looking Theron up and down. By now, he could certainly afford a better cultivation technique, but he didn't bother to get one. Instead, he used the slowest method available to him, and yet had somehow reached the 8th resonance so swiftly. But this method was also the one without the slightest holes. It was just as Theron had said. His cultivation method might be slow, but it was also the one guaranteed to not have the slightest flaw, at least until the end of Goldmancy. What techniques do you practice? Theron listed them. All 5. You practice 5 techniques? The old man frowned. 3 are at the consummate barrier, 1 is at adept, and the last is at proficient. The more questions the old man asked Theron, the more ridiculous he found it. He didn't know whether he was listening to a child speak or a fictional character. Slowly, he shook his head. Like I said, I can only teach you assassination techniques, but understanding your foundation is necessary. As you know from the tenets, it's not about what you know, but about how you apply them. I will teach you 2 methods, both of which are related to vein song. The first is a concentrated attack that channels the focus you gain from vein song into a powerful blow that is as much as double your baseline strength. The second is an escape method. This channels the focus you gain from vein song in a burning blood method that increases your speed as much as 10 times. With your current body, you should be able to match the speed of a higher silver resonance mancer for a minute or 2. Both methods are sacrificial and dangerous to use, especially for those of us who are not flux mancers. These methods are known as Songful Blade and Blood Escape. Prepare yourself. The run here was for no reason other than to warm your body up. 3 days later, the old man sat alone at his stone tea table, seemingly the only part of his little peaceful garden that wasn't disturbed. I wonder, he said to himself after a sip. Did I make a mistake? He looked toward some sliced rock in the distance, and then some deep-foot plants imprinted right into the trunks of ancient trees. Reaching forward, he pulled his teapot toward him and then poured the steaming liquid, not into his cup, but onto a small plate. With a tap of his finger, an image began to sparkle into being. When it solidified, an unexpected image reflected back. Raiden, even my little disciple here has only barely mastered those techniques. Just what kind of monster are you, exactly? The old man was a legend amongst legends. Theron had never asked for his name, nor had he ever shown any signs of giving it, and maybe that was good. If Theron had known it, maybe even he would have trouble keeping his cool. The nondescript old man was known by a single title, for little words that reverberated not just across this province, but them all. Cadence of the Crypt. But maybe his more shocking identity right this moment was that of being precisely the overprotective master of Raiden. Theron collapsed in his basement, his body spasming. It felt as though he had been swallowed by a cramp that went head to toe. With his control over water mana, how could he, of all people, suffer cramps? But this time, he truly couldn't control it. His muscles formed balls and knots in his body, and even soaking in water didn't seem to have helped. The balance of his body itself was off. Water alone wasn't enough. He needed minerals, supplementation, food, and sustenance. He understood enough about his body and bodies in general to know this, but that didn't mean it would be any easier to deal with when just moving made him feel like death. Unfortunately for him, there was a trembling of mana that passed through his abode, a system to let him know that someone was at the door. And he got the very unfortunate feeling that he knew exactly who it was. Teacher Byrne had returned. He grit his teeth, forcing himself up. What happened next would certainly be a large part of his plan. If Byrne had returned so quickly, it was only for one reason. They wanted him to kill Thessa. He could see their plans long before they had even decided on them. This was his chessboard, not theirs.